So the first thing is I'd just like to thank everybody for the invitation to speak, to take part in the community conversation, particularly about a topic that often doesn't get too much airtime in discussions around nature and ecology. I was struck recently by the Climate Action Plan for 2024, which is a very substantial document. It runs to 446 pages. There's tens of thousands of words in it, but there's not a single word about the Irish language, not a single word in Irish. So there's clearly a question here as to why this is happening. Because if you think about in that wonderful presentation that Lucy gave us when she's, showing us all the different aspects of the natural world on the island of Ireland, and I kept translating in my head the images of all those animals and flowers and birds that we're seeing on the images into a language that's been used to describe every field, every tree, every living being on this island for more than 2,000 years. It has been, for most of the recorded history of our presence on this island, the way in which we've communicated with the more than human world. So it obviously is a way for us to connect with our natural past, our natural present, and also, I would argue, into our natural future. In terms of what happened, or why I think there is this kind of break between language and the more than human world. Garda Tóigh, the Galway historian, says that what happened around the time of the famine was the most important historical event, particularly in terms of the shift from Irish to English, because what we get in the famine period is a kind of convergence of a huge environmental catastrophe, which is precipitated by this reliance on a particular kind of monoculture, which of course in itself is a result of historical and political factors. And this, at the time that we get this environmental catastrophe, we also get a linguistic catastrophe in terms of the massive shift of the population, which was beginning before the famine, but greatly accelerates in that period. And I think one of the consequences of this is a kind of sundering between language and landscape, because effectively, and you must remember that this happened in a very short period of time. It basically happens over the space of 2 generations, where people basically lose their capacity to describe in detail the landscape that they inhabit, the kinds of the stories, the connections, the contexts that embedded human communities in the landscape, which is mediated very, very powerfully through language, through song, through incantation, through which that this gets sundered or broken. And I think one of the consequences of that, and one that I think we're still living with, is a tendency to, if you like, embrace a culture of possession rather than a culture of dwelling. I mean, in John Collins' book about Longford, about kind of running through Longford, he talks about there's something that's gone absent, something that's missing, this kind of traumatic gap or void or absence. And he says we're a half shadow to the ghost people. Sean de Freyne, in a very famous book from the 1960s, The Great Silence, he talks about how the sudden silencing of the landscape, with the absence of great numbers of people who either die of starvation, famine, disease, or emigrate, that it leaves a kind of a silence behind. But I think that silence is not just a human speaking community, but it's also the interaction between the community and the natural world that it inhabited. So one of the consequences of that then is, I think, very much a kind of an investment in a culture of possession. Because remember, you have a traumatized people, you have a dispossessed people, and what they're basically going to be primarily preoccupied with is the repossession of the land. It's a kind of the possession of the land itself becomes a central struggle, which means then as a consequence that possession becomes everything. And what tends to then diminish, particularly in the light of this severe linguistic trauma, this kind of dramatic break between the population and the world that it inhabits, is that a culture of dwelling is severely damaged. The sense that you can kind of dwell knowingly and fully in a particular place is going to be affected by this very dramatic event, whose consequences, I think, continue on into the present day in different kinds of ways. So that, if you like, is, I think, an important context for thinking about the relationship between the Irish language and ecology. So how do we respond to this then? One of the ways I think we can respond to it is to think about the notion of the particular, of particularizing something. So what does that mean? Well, I take this notion from a book by the English nature writer Robert Macfarlane, when he talks about getting a copy for his son of the Oxford Junior Dictionary. And he's thumbing through the dictionary, and he realizes that the word for acorn isn't there, beech is missing, bluebell is missing, buttercup is missing, catkin is missing, otter, we saw otters earlier, this otter isn't in the Junior Dictionary, pasture is not there, willow is not there. So when Macfarlane contacts the publishers, they say these words are left out because they're no longer they're surplus to requirements. We feel that young children no longer need these words in the English language. So what Macfarlane argues is the consequence of this is that you turn the landscape into a blandscape. So you just say the tree over there, the river over there, the mountain over there, the flower over there. You use these kind of generic words rather than using particularizing words, because once you begin to distinguish a dart, an oak tree from fish oak, from a fir tree, you're going to have to, once you use a specific word, then you're going to say, what is it about this tree that requires it having a different name, a different word? So you begin to particularize your landscape. And talking about a man called Barry Lopez, who spent a lot of his time traveling in the Arctic, he says that Lopez's intense attentiveness was a form of moral gaze born of his belief that if we attend more closely to something, then we're less likely to act more selfishly towards it. So I think that one of the things that's been happening in the last number of years in Ireland, and I think this is a source of great hope, is the way in which through the Irish language, people are beginning to, if you like, particularize their landscape, that through the re-embracing, the rediscovery of the potential and the capacity of Irish, they're beginning to kind of reconnect through the words in the language. Famously, the late lamented, recently deceased Amancham McGann, in his 32 Words for Field, a book that explores the kinds of words that we have in the Irish language to differentiate and describe our landscape, that what we're beginning to do, if you like, through that is a way of particularizing, of establishing a connection to the more than human world. And what is particularly exhilarating about this is that this is a connection that goes back a very, very, very long time. It establishes that kind of sense of continuity with a living community and the more than human world. And one of the things, if you like, in terms of newcomers to the island, is that the language is available to them to establish that connection with the living world on the island. And this, of course, as we can see with the sea Tamagotchi here that Manchon produced as well, it relates as much to the terrestrial landscape as it does to the maritime landscape of Ireland. One of the points that's made by a thinker from Belfast, Chris Arthur, is that we are completely dominated by what he calls indoor thinking. In the particular passage that I've selected here, millions of us have become more defined by the time we spend indoors than outside. As a result, we've lost touch with the natural world. Those with the most pronounced indoor sensibilities can't identify even the commonest species of birds, insects, and plants in their locality. So in other words, one of the problems that we have is that we grow up, we're born into houses, dwellings, boxes, then we go to school and primary school and we're indoors, then we go to secondary school for more years and we're indoors, and then some people go to third level institutions or the training institutions, and again it's more time spent indoors, then people go off to their workplaces, again indoors. So what you get then is the complete the kind of the prevalence of forms of thinking, forms of engagement with the world, which are thoroughly saturated by our experience of living indoors, which results in our kind of developing indoors thinking. And I think this is one of the things where we could make a very, very important leap forward in terms of the Irish language, is when you think of how most people acquire the Irish language, they acquire the Irish language inside the boxes of the schoolroom. And what that means then is you've got a language which is saturated with the more than human world of this island, but is completely disconnected from the learning experience of that language. So there have been various projects in different parts of the island to sort of bring the language outdoors. And I think that one of the advantages of doing that is to show or to demonstrate in a very, very tangible way how the Irish language connects continuously with the world that is outside, with this sort of outdoors world. I work in a box in the center of the city. The city itself is called Dublin in Irish. In English, in Irish, it's called Dublin, the Black Pool. It's called Baile Átha Cliath, the town by the ford of the Yellow Hurdle. So, again, a reference to water. My office, when I leave it, I go out onto a street that in English is called Nassau Street, but in Irish it's called Sráid Haberfáric, the street of Patrick's Well, because a well near the college, the Nassau Street entrance. And I take my children at the weekend to park on Uisce, Phoenix Park, the park of the clear stream or water. So if you like, in the Irish language, when I take it outside, I found a world that is full of water, a world that is invisible in English, but becomes visible in Irish, almost as if the Irish for Dublin is Venice. And of course, it's rising sea waters and having access to clean water, which are some of the biggest ecological problems facing the city. One of the problems, of course, that many of you, I'm sure, will raise in the discussions around this language is that Irish is rather like the environment. The two things that both the Irish language and the environment are guaranteed to produce is a profound sense of guilt. Guilt ecologically because we're not doing enough. Guilt very often linguistically because many people feel that their Irish isn't good enough. They've had bad experiences of Irish in school. It was something they found very dry, very academic, very removed, etc. And I think here there is a comment a man called Timothy Morton in his book Being Ecological makes, which he's talking about ecology. He says, present ways in which we talk to ourselves about ecology are often stuck in the horror mode, disgust, shame, guilt. And he argues that, we need to kind of try and move on from this. And he says, just keeping life forms alive is allowing for some kind of pleasure. And don't forget the pleasure of enjoying their existence and the pleasure of doing less harm. And then I realized this sort of feeling would be what living in an ecologically attuned society feels like. Instead of policing pleasure, we would be inventing new ones. And I think, so the idea of, not being involved in the business of policing things, but inventing new pleasures and enjoyments, I think this is one of the crucial contributions that the Irish language can make. The sense in which that through the language you suddenly have a completely new way of viewing a world that is so familiar to you, opening up different paths in terms of how place names connect you to storytelling and lore, to the different kinds of songs that it connects you to the names of different plants, flowers, species, and so on. The kind of the significance that the fox, that the hare, that the otter has in Irish folklore, and how all of these are kind of opened up through the language itself. I mean, what you get then is the language itself as an invitation to kind of reinvigorate and create an extraordinary sense of wonder in every single inhabited part of this island. And this, it seems to me, is part of what a number of thinkers. This is a Brazilian thinker who's done an awful lot of work with the Amerindian communities in Latin America. And he talks about what he calls future-oriented cosmologies. And what he means by that is that, often minoritized or indigenous languages, Irish, of course, the indigenous language of Ireland, they're often associated with the past, with kind of heritage, with something that is from an older time. But what you find in so many of the indigenous understandings of the relationship between human and landscape are viable and sustainable and resilient ways of understanding and interacting with that landscape. When we think of the rights of nature movement in contemporary Ireland and how we can potentially link that to the Breton law eco-jurisprudence of an earlier time. If we think of forms of early Irish poetic expression, which presented in very clear terms the intimate relationship between the human and the more than human, what we actually see in the language is not a relic of the past, but a blueprint for the future, a way of, if you like, creating a more sustainable and a viable relationship for ourselves as islanders on the island of Ireland. Kerry Ní Doherty from Derry, in a beautiful book came out a number of years ago called Thin Places, talks about, she says, the loss of the ability to name both the landscape and the creatures we share with it in Irish began to sink in. So she's talking about this feeling that she has. An incomparable loss has been touching the wider world, growing with each newspaper report we hear during my lifetime. Somehow I'd always viewed the loss of wild things as being unrelated to the loss of my homeland, as though they could not be spoken of in the same breath. But I started to feel an ache, a deep sorrow, when I began to see it all in the clear light of day, how interconnected, how finely woven every single part of it all was. So what the theme places are those places in the landscape where you suddenly come into contact with another world. It's the possibility of passing into another world. If we kind of translate that into kind of more secular language, it's the idea that what language in the Irish language does is it gives you the potential or the capacity to see and connect with the world differently. The way and to kind of reconnect with that connection which has been established by people living on this island for over 2,000 years. So I want to end with that vital word, dulchas, hope. And what Ní Doherty says at one point in her book, she says, the Irish word for hope is dulchas, or dóigh, and holds deep within its ancient roots glimmers of the Irish for giving, for belonging, for beauty, dóil. Yes, we are ready now to speak of hope. We have the words for it, and that changes things. In fact, that changes everything. 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was in the streets of Dublin with 25,000 other people marching for Irish language rights. And I was up towards Delir Street, and I looked back down O'Connell Street, and it was full of people that were more than half my age. And I saw in that stream of people down O'Connell Street the signs of that dulchas that Ní Doherty talks about. And it seems to me that one of the extraordinary points of convergence of this sense of dulchas or hope is the reconnection of a living language with the idea of nature restoration and the future development of nature restoration in Ireland. But I think it's probably time that I moved from dulchas to coolness and I went silent, so to allow the conversation to continue. Many thanks.